In this module, we will build upon the learner's previous knowledge, skills, and experiences with listening and speaking in French in order to explore the different tools and strategies that learners can use to make sense of the texts they are reading. Through explicit teaching of reading comprehension strategies and language awareness tools, the learner will begin to comprehend a variety of meaningful, diverse, and inclusive French texts. When you pause the video to reflect upon the prompting questions, consider the ways in which you can provide guidance and support to your FSL educators. The strategies and activities suggested in this module are intended for FSL learners in all grades across all programs. For a more comprehensive explanation of these suggested strategies and activities, refer to the glossary of terms at the end of the document. Most of the tasks and strategies shared in this module can be easily applied to distance learning using the technology tools and platforms that have been approved by your board. There are a few key goals for this module. First, we are providing reading instruction to help our learners decode French texts. Then, we are implementing the gradual release of responsibility model to teach language awareness tools and reading comprehension strategies. The learner can then select the most effective tools and strategies to comprehend a text. Next, we are using our learners' previous experiences with listening and speaking to help them create meaning, make connections, and respond to what they are reading. Finally, we are selecting and examining a variety of authentic texts that are appropriate, relevant, and inclusive to the needs, identities, and interests of the learners we teach. Reading is the gateway skill that makes all other learning possible, is a quote stated by Barack Obama. In other words, learning to read opens up the mind to learning and acquiring new information. When learners evolve from learning to read to reading to learn, they expand their vocabulary and extend their oral language. Ultimately, reading supports cognitive development, leads to improved language skills, and prepares learners for academic success. When learners come across words in several different contexts through reading, they start to understand and comprehend vocabulary in a more meaningful way. As written in the FSL curriculum, if students hear it, they can say it. If students can say it, they can read it. And if students can read it, they can write it. Therefore, when our learners can read, they will learn the words, vocabulary, and sentence structures necessary to help them write.
On November 9th, 2012, the Supreme Court of Canada released a unanimous decision recognizing that learning to read is not a privilege, but a basic and essential human right. Reading is one of the most fundamental skills. According to the Ministry of Education's Effective Early Reading Instruction Guide, reading affects all academic achievement and is associated with social, emotional, economical, and physical health. However, learning to read does not happen naturally. The ability to read is not innate. Reading is a process involving specific skills that need to be taught and learned. As these skills develop, the brain forms new connections known as neural pathways. These neural pathways for reading are built through systematic and explicit instruction and strengthened through repeated practice. The ultimate goal of reading is the comprehension of a written text. In other words, understanding what is being read. French as a second language learners have an added layer of complexity in that they are learning an additional language as they simultaneously develop the skills of decoding and word recognition. The FSL curriculum emphasizes that language and language learning skills in the four strands overlap and strengthen one another, building from listening and speaking to reading and writing, thus building the base for reading comprehension. This model shows the simple view of reading, illustrating comprehension as being the product of word recognition and background knowledge. Simply stated, to comprehend a written text, a learner must be able to decode the word in combination with their understanding of the word's meaning. In many of our FSL programs, our youngest learners are learning to read simultaneously in English and French. However, they do not have the breadth and magnitude of vocabulary or mastery of language that will lead to the comprehension of what they are able to decode. Should we then wait until learners are able to speak French at a functional level before exploring reading and writing in FSL programs? Carolyn Erdos and Fred Genesee state that no, students do not have to have functional competence in oral French before they learn to read and write in French. Students can begin to acquire foundational as well as functional skills in reading and writing at the same time as they are learning to speak and comprehend the language. However, until they have developed adequate listening and speaking skills in French, they will require support to understand what they read and to express ideas in written French. Several explicitly taught skills intertwine into skilled reading as illustrated by Scarborough's reading rope. The genesis of the reading rope dates back to Scarborough's lectures for parents on the complexities involved in learning to read. Originally, Scarborough spoke of skilled reading as resembling the strands of a rope, using pipe cleaners to illustrate the interconnectedness and interdependence of all of the components. The upper strands of the rope represent language comprehension, including background knowledge, vocabulary, language structures, verbal reasoning, and literacy knowledge. These strands reinforce one another and then weave together with the lower strands, leading to skilled reading. The lower strands of the reading rope are the word recognition strands, that is, phonological awareness, decoding, and sight recognition of familiar words. These strands weave together as a reader becomes more accurate, fluent, and increasingly automatic with repetition and practice. According to Scarborough's reading rope, a groundbreaking infographic, skilled reading can be defined as fluent execution and coordination of word recognition and text comprehension. The lower strands of Scarborough's reading rope develop the decoding portion of the simple view of reading equation. As educators continually work to develop the language and background knowledge of learners in their second language, they must also work on the learner's recognition of words. This includes phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics, and sight recognition of words. In response to the Ontario Human Rights Commission Right to Read report, released in 2022, the Ontario Ministry of Education released Effective Early Reading Instruction, a Teacher's Guide. The guide outlines the interconnectedness of the lower strands of the reading rope as follows. The instructional focus of foundational reading skills shifts based on the overall progression and students' mastery of skills that are taught. Instruction on building phonological awareness of words in speech and larger sound units in words, such as syllables and rhymes, generally needs to take up only a small amount of time early in the reading program. Phonemic awareness then becomes one focus, alongside phonics instruction, within a clearly delineated scope and sequence. Word study skills will play a larger role as students progress. Average reading development by grade is identified in the figure on the slide, but mastery of grapheme phoneme knowledge, sounding out words, and building automatic word reading are indicators that it is time to shift the focus of instruction along a continuum of word reading skill development. Phonics instruction and word study become progressively more complex across the grades as students move forward along the scope and sequence of skill development. Word study incorporates knowledge of common syllables in multisyllabic words, knowledge of morphemes, and the morphemic structure of words. This knowledge will lead to improved word reading, building of sight words, and spelling skills. The strands of the reading rope illustrate the importance of all of the skills required to develop a fluent reader that can comprehend text, shifting them from learning to read to reading to learn. These foundational skills, oral language, phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics, word study, and fluency, do not develop naturally. Learners must be taught to read through direct, systematic, and explicit instruction. As stated in the Effective Early Reading Instruction, a Teacher's Guide, systematic and explicit instruction of early reading skills supports students' development of reading comprehension and fluency. Systematic instruction refers to concepts and materials that are taught through a carefully planned scope and sequence using decodable texts. It starts with basic concepts and progresses to more complex concepts broken down into small, manageable sections. Explicit instruction refers to teaching that is clear, direct, and purposeful. The Ontario Human Rights Commission Right to Read Inquiry Report included recommendations for direct and systematic instruction, and included aligning the elementary and English and French language curricula with scientific evidence-based approaches that emphasize direct and systematic instruction and eliminate the 3 queuing system. In FSL classrooms, this approach could involve co-planning with the English and French immersion educator teams, the reinforcement of skills woven into a French immersion class, or a discussion around differences in phoneme or grapheme sounds with learners in core French. It is important to consider what the learner brings in reading experience and exposure in order to provide the explicit instruction that will help them to progress. In the FSL context, the educator must also keep in mind the level of exposure to French and its impact on comprehension. In determining the reading skills of our learners, educators can find and fill gaps, intentionally group learners in order to provide explicit instruction that is immediately relevant, and teach systematically to ensure that our learners are progressing in all of the skills or strands of reading development. Phonological awareness involves a continuum of skills that develop over time and that are crucial for reading and spelling success. An awareness of the sounds that make up words is critical to being able to blend sounds together for later reading and segmenting words into sounds for later spelling. Phonological awareness refers to the ability to reflect on the sound structure of spoken language. This includes the ability to identify and produce words that rhyme, to hear individual syllables within a word, and to break down a word into its onset and rhyme. Phonemic awareness is a subcomponent of phonological awareness. It refers to the ability to identify and manipulate the smallest units of sound in spoken words called phonemes. Segmenting and blending phonemes are two of the most important skills contributing directly to reading development. Phonological and phonemic awareness instruction are powerful components of reading instruction and can be incorporated quickly to provide learners with practice and repetition that they need to reach proficiency. French programs that include structured daily practice of blending, segmenting, and manipulating are programs that are providing important tools in the development of reading. Knowledge of individual sounds provides learners with the understanding that words are more than whole units that need to be visually memorized. With knowledge and understanding of speech sounds, learners are able to orthographically map the sounds of speech onto their phonetic representation, that is, the grapheme, or letters that represent that sound. This is referred to as phonics. The goal of phonics instruction is to learn the alphabetic principle, the idea that letters represent the sounds of spoken language, and that there's an organized, logical, and predictable relationship between written letters and spoken sounds. Learning that there are predictable relationships between sounds and letters allows learners to apply these relationships to both familiar and unfamiliar words and begin to read with fluency. It is important that phonics be taught following a structured plan, often called a scope and sequence, and accompanied by frequent opportunities for learners to apply what they are learning about letters and sounds to the reading of words, sentences, and stories. A scope and sequence systematically and explicitly guides instruction based on a logical skill sequence, building upon what has been previously learned. New learning should then be applied and practiced in a reading context using decodable text. That is, written text containing words made up of the letter sounds that have been explicitly taught. According to the International Dyslexia Association of Ontario, it is important that the decodable text closely matches the sequence of instruction in letter sounds, morphemes, phonetically irregular words, syllable types, and spelling patterns that are taught throughout a structured literacy program, especially for struggling readers. Co-creating text is a great way to reinforce learning and create a sense of ownership for our learners in their reading journey. Fluency, reading with accuracy, automaticity, and prosody, combines sight word recognition with background knowledge, leading to comprehension. Note that the term sight word in this context refers to the ability to recognize words automatically without sounding out each grapheme, and not high frequency or irregular words. The decoding skills explicitly taught through phonics enable readers to develop and strengthen word recognition, leading to automaticity with those words, that is, without the cognitive load required to sound out words individually. Fluent reading allows the learner to focus on what the text is saying, providing the space to make connections between what they are reading and their own background knowledge. Integrating all of the components of a reading program, that is, oral language development, phonological and phonemic awareness, phonics, fluency, vocabulary, and comprehension, can take different forms and can be adapted to the environment. An FSL context could vary in how each of these components are addressed, with perhaps a little more structured focus on each component in a primary French immersion classroom, while in a junior core French classroom, the emphasis might shift to greater emphasis on oral language and vocabulary development. The format and application of instruction may also shift to context, considering perhaps working with guided groups instead of guided reading, and tailoring the activities to meet the needs of the learners in the group. The instruction of skills can overlap, such as by teaching oral language and foundational decoding skills simultaneously to beginning learners. This is of particular importance in an FSL context, as learners are naturally developing both skills simultaneously in their environment. Learners could be presented with the sounds of letters in French as they are taught the names of familiar and unfamiliar objects, actions, or qualities. Or educators could provide pictures or objects with the same initial sound, stressing that sound as new vocabulary is learned. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider these questions. What basic components should be implemented in the teaching of reading? What activities could you include in your FSL classroom to integrate all of the components of a reading program? The ultimate goal of reading is comprehension, understanding what is being read. Reading comprehension relies on the ability to read most or all of the words in a text fluently, in conjunction with the background knowledge and vocabulary that a learner has acquired. Given the importance of the foundational word reading skills previously mentioned, it is tempting to think that early instruction should focus on the development of those skills and only later address comprehension. It is important, however, to provide instruction simultaneously into the development of oral language, particularly in an FSL context. It is also important to include development of oral comprehension of written language, such as through read-alouds. As written in The Science of Reading Comprehension Instruction, an article linked in the viewer's guide, the relation between word reading instruction and reading comprehension instruction is more synergistic than competitive. Reading comprehension is very much affected by what one is reading and the purpose for which they are reading. The CFR companion volume states that it is generally recognized that in assessing reading comprehension, it is necessary to pay attention to the role of the text, that is, text types, the reader, their skills and knowledge resources, the context, the domains of language use, and the purposes of reading. Particular mental activities support proficient comprehension, and explicit instruction should be provided in how to think before, during, and after reading, how to monitor understanding, and how to work through a text when meaning breaks down. Our learners in the core French and middle or late French immersion programs face a more complex landscape in the development of reading in French. These learners have been exposed to the foundational skills in their first language and are likely fluent L1 readers. The challenge for these learners is that of language comprehension and the development of vocabulary in their additional language. The FSL curriculum states that an effective reader not only grasps the ideas communicated in a text, but is able to apply them in new contexts. To do this, the student must be able to think clearly, creatively, and critically about the ideas and information encountered in texts. Students may come to the task of reading in French equipped with the skills developed in reading in their first language. However, as they learn to read in French, students are acquiring new vocabulary and language structures, as well as new phonological awareness of the sound system of French. Students build on their experiences with listening to and speaking French and apply that knowledge to determine the meaning of written texts. Initially, students will be exposed to text with simplified language that is appropriate to their age and language development. With teacher guidance and support, students will begin to understand the meaning of the texts they read. As students develop their reading skills, they will be able to read texts of increasing complexity and will have many opportunities to read for a variety of purposes, for example, to get directions or advice, for personal interest or enjoyment, for practice, to build vocabulary, to satisfy curiosity, or for research. An FSL educator needs to grasp where their learner is in the development of reading, as well as their understanding of the French language in order to present them with the next step in their learning.
Knowing how language functions helps learners to understand and comprehend what they are reading. Sound simple relationships, cognates, also known as mots amis, familiar words, word families, and language structures are effective language awareness tools for the FSL reader. Knowing how language works can also help the learner to predict the meaning of new and unfamiliar words and phrases. Opportunities to develop and practice using these tools in real and meaningful contexts will help the learner to better understand and communicate in French. Providing opportunities for learners to see word patterns and practice sound simple relationships is an important step as they begin to work with words in French. Essentially, learners are implementing graphophonics. They are learning about the relationship between the letters and letter combinations they see and the sounds they make when they are pronounced. One way that our FSL learners can see patterns and practice the sound simple relationships is through the use of word sort activities. Word sorts require the learner to group words or parts of words containing similar sounds. Keep in mind that the words selected for these activities should be words that our learners are using in the authentic texts that they are exploring. Cognates, or mots amis, are words that are the same as or similar to words in English or to the learner's knowledge of another language. Familiar words, or mots familiers, are words that they already know or have already learned. Word walls anchor charts, and personal dictionaries can be useful to help the learner recall familiar words that they have already learned. Looking for both of these types of words will help the learner to decode and enhance their comprehension of a French text. Word families are groups of words that share a common root that links them together. For example, the word chanter belongs to the same word family as chanson, chanteur, and chanteuse. Word walls organized by word families can help the learners see how new words are created from familiar words, thus expanding their vocabulary. Grammar and language structures should be taught in context at the right time. For example, when learners are required to express what they or their friends like to do, it would be a good opportunity to introduce various forms of the verb aimer and how it is used. The explicit and purposeful teaching of this language structure is meaningful to the task at hand. When language structures are presented in this way, the learner can understand and see its purpose, which in turn will improve their ability to communicate effectively. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider this question. What are some specific examples of activities and tools that can be used in the classroom in order for the learner to successfully and effectively apply language awareness tools when reading French? There are many different activities that will engage the FSL learner when exploring a text. 3 phases should be considered: before reading, during reading, and after reading. When educators look at the phase before reading, there are 3 aspects to consider: contextualization, personalization, and anticipation. Contextualization sets the purpose for exploring the text and identifies the type of text. Personalization enables the reader to make connections to the text's theme or topic by relating it to their own personal experiences. Anticipation involves the reader in making predictions about what they will read. Learners will be more successful at comprehending the text if they have a chance to anticipate the content. It is important to ask questions during reading in order to assess comprehension. Some questions should be knowledge-based, such as by asking the learner to recall facts, give examples, or draw a picture. Questions that involve more higher-level thinking, such as comparing, contrasting, drawing conclusions, and giving opinions, should also be used to check for understanding. The final phase of exploring a text is an opportunity to make the text real and bring it to life after reading. The learner can share their reaction to the text, revisit the text to get additional information, make connections between the text and their prior knowledge, and respond to the text in a variety of ways. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider this question. What are some key actions that FSL learners and educators can implement at each phase of exploring a text? What questions can the learners ask to make meaning from what is being read? According to the FSL curriculum, most students will benefit from explicit classroom instruction regarding the use of French language learning strategies in authentic and relevant contexts. Therefore, methodically and purposefully teaching reading comprehension strategies will provide the learner with the tools necessary to communicate effectively and make meaning from what they are reading. It is important, however, to keep in mind that implementing a gradual release of responsibility model when teaching these strategies ensures that the learners will be able to use them effectively. First, the educator should introduce and explain the strategy that will be used. For example, the strategy of looking for cognates, mots amis, can be explained by giving examples of words that are similar to or the same as words in English, such as bleu, crasse, mat, âge, or non. Next, it is important for the educator to model the strategy using a think aloud, expressions, gestures, or nonverbal cues to demonstrate the use of the strategy. For example, the educator could use think aloud to think about all of the familiar words and phrases that have to do with the subject of the text. A critical step in the process of developing the ability to apply reading comprehension strategies is the opportunity to practice the strategy. Here, the process of scaffolding the use of the comprehension strategy is key. The educator should begin with shared practice, where students participate and are engaged in using the strategy. Then, the educator implements guided practice, where learners practice using the strategy with feedback. Finally, independent practice enables the learners to use the strategy on their own. We cannot expect the students to use the comprehension strategies if they have not had time to practice it gradually. When we explicitly teach reading comprehension strategies, learners are able to determine for themselves which strategies work best to support their understanding. Learners can self-reflect upon the success of the strategies that they have applied by using a checklist, as shown on this slide. A link to this self-reflection checklist is provided in the viewer's guide. The strategies that are linked here are specific to second language learners, and when used, can be very effective for successfully reading and comprehending a French text. Implementing the gradual release of responsibility model is once again important when developing a balanced reading program. A balanced additional language reading program consists of 4 components: read aloud or modeled reading, shared reading, guided reading, and independent reading. The more opportunities that FSL learners have to regularly engage in these reading practices with a variety of French texts, the more proficient, fluent, and confident they will become at reading French. Read aloud or modeled reading refers to the instructional practice of texts being read aloud to the learners, who are in turn active listeners. The educator models fluent and proficient reading, incorporating variations in pitch, tone, pace, expression, and volume to produce a pleasant listening of the text. Shared reading is an interactive reading experience that occurs when learners join in or share the reading of a text while guided and supported by the educator. The educator explicitly models and teaches reading comprehension strategies and skills in an intent to develop reading fluency and an understanding of the reading process. Guided groups involve small group reading instruction designed to provide differentiated teaching that supports learners in developing reading proficiency. Texts are chosen to reflect specific needs, identities, and interests, and learners are guided toward independence as readers. Independent reading enables the learner to select engaging texts that are based on their personal interests and reading ability. By participating in independent reading, learners can practice decoding and reading comprehension strategies, as well as develop their fluency and confidence as readers.
The FSL curriculum states that through the study of French, students experience multiple opportunities to communicate for authentic purposes in real-life situations. These opportunities enable students to build on and apply their knowledge of French in everyday academic and social situations, thus developing effective communication skills. It is important that learners read a range of authentic materials illustrating the many uses of writing, because these texts serve as models for texts that they will create. By reading widely, learners will develop a richer vocabulary and become more attuned to the conventions of written language. Reading various kinds of texts in all areas of the curriculum will also help FSL learners discover, pursue, and develop their interests and abilities. The reading program should therefore include a wide variety of literary, informational, and graphic texts, such as websites, magazines, comics, posters, recipes, instructions, informative texts, graphic texts, menus, newspaper articles, letters, biographies, schedules, reviews, and more. Exposing learners to authentic texts provides a model for how language is actually used by native speakers and pulls them into the target culture. Learners grow their vocabulary in a way that mimics how the brain acquires their first language and moves them from learning to read to reading to learn. Learners need to hear and read authentic French texts. As stated in Module 2 of Phase 1 of the OMLTA MLC module project, the selection of text should expose a learner to authentic vocabulary and a variety of text forms. Authentic texts not only engage students in seeing French in different real-life forms, but also act as models for vocabulary and sentence structures that would support students as they prepare for action-oriented tasks. The Je peux statements of the CEFR and its related activities depict the development of reading comprehension in an additional language and provide important models of appropriate text to consider when engaging learners at each level. CFR reading comprehension exercises also provide models of authentic text in the form of ads, emails, directions on a map, and more. The FSL curriculum goes beyond the need for authentic text to encourage learners to explore text through the lens of critical literacy. Critical literacy is the capacity for a particular type of critical thinking that involves looking beyond the literal meaning of a text to determine what is present and what is missing, in order to analyze and evaluate the text's complete meaning and the author's intent. Critical literacy focuses on issues related to fairness, equity, and social justice. Students adopt a critical stance, asking what view of the world the text advances and whether they find this view acceptable, who benefits from the text, and how the reader is influenced. Critically literate students understand that meaning is not found in texts in isolation. People make sense of a text or determine what a text means in a variety of ways. The curriculum asks educators and learners to consider point of view, for example, those of people from various cultures. Contexts, the beliefs and practices of the time and place in which a text was created and those in which it is being read or viewed. The background of the person interacting with the text, upbringing, friends, school, and other communities, their education and experiences. Intertextuality, information that a reader or viewer brings to the text from other texts experienced previously. Gaps in the text, information that is left out, that the reader or viewer must fill in. Silences in the text, voices of a person or group that is not heard. Such discussions empower students to understand how the authors of texts are trying to influence them as members of a society. Language and communication are never neutral. They are used to inform, entertain, persuade, and manipulate. While the FSL curriculum asks our learners to approach texts critically, we, as educators, must also consider representation in the materials, resources, and texts that we choose to include in our instruction and our classroom spaces. Are all of our learners represented? Can they see themselves in the text we choose to highlight? Are other perspectives and worldviews represented? Can we move beyond traditional texts to explore texts that question or disrupt? The collective catalog of FSL Books for Diversity is a passion project of FSL teachers from across the province with the goal of updating our bookshelves and bookrooms with novels by and about Black people, Indigenous people, and other people of color, and to use these novels to disrupt racism in our classes and communities. This group has brought together teachers to read, question, and explore texts beyond those traditionally explored in FSL courses, and have developed and shared instructional strategies to broaden the interpretation of texts so that diverse ways of knowing can be supported and valued. Rudian and Bishop state that text should be approached as mirrors, windows, and sliding glass doors, offering window views of worlds beyond our own, sliding glass doors to walk through in imagination, or mirrors that reflect experience back to us. These perspectives can inspire empathy and understanding, as well as reflect and bolster identity. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider this question. What criteria should be considered when selecting authentic types of text to meet the needs of all learners?
Assessments in FSL should highlight what the learners are able to do, as well as inform next steps for instruction and learning. In reading, educators are assessing the learner's ability to apply reading comprehension strategies to make meaning of written French texts, acquire new vocabulary, language structures, and a phonological awareness in order to read with fluency, understand French texts and sociolinguistic conventions about diverse French-speaking communities, and identify the purposes, forms, and styles of a variety of authentic French texts. Some potential means of assessments of the FSL curriculum expectations for reading could be to have the learner read a French passage aloud for 1 minute, checking for fluency, read a French passage and respond to factual or inferential questions, fill in missing words or retell the text, read a list of words and rate the words on how well they know them to assess their vocabulary acquisition and development, or complete a self-assessment checklist, identifying and reflecting upon the reading comprehension strategies used before, during, and after reading to make sense of a text. Various assessment tools frequently used in the FSL learning environment include graphic organizers, performance tasks, peer and self-assessment, portfolios, learning logs, journals, observation checklists, anecdotal data, rubrics, conferences, and checklists. It is important to keep in mind that effective assessment incorporates a varied toolkit in order to meet the needs of all learners and to set appropriate learning goals. Precise, timely, and specific feedback is required for ongoing success and improvement in the language learning journey. At this time, you may wish to pause the video to consider this question. What assessment resources, strategies, and tools would you implement to effectively assess reading of the FSL learner?
Your voice and feedback support the development of future professional learning series. Please take a moment to complete the following survey with your team. Should you have any questions about this module, please send an email to omlta@omlta.org. These modules were created under the leadership of the Ontario Modern Languages Teachers Association. The OMLTA is a nonprofit professional association that has been supporting French as a second language and international languages teachers of all programs and grade levels since 1886. Today, it continues to be the leader in professional learning and advocacy, inspiring and connecting Ontario's French and international languages educators. These modules were designed to support FSL teacher retention and recruitment by deepening the understanding of the directions, principles, and content of the Ontario curriculum policy documents for all three of the province's FSL programs: Core French, Extended French, and French Immersion. The OMLTA would like to thank the Ministry of Education for its financial support in developing these modules. Special thanks is also extended to the educators who contributed their expertise and experience to the development of these modules.